Yo, what's up? What's up? Obviously, want to talk about my man, Mike Tomlin. Good morning, everybody. Hope your morning is starting off great. Crazy kind of weekend. Obviously, Steelers getting kicked in the face by the Texans. Big news with Mike Tomlin. So, just figured I'd hop on real quick, man, and just take some time to show some appreciation and have a little reflection about Coach T in his 19 years for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I'll go ahead and I'll get this thing rolling for sure, man. Um, Big thing, man, for me is just you gotta see, man, like just shout out to Coach T, man, and like what he has done for the culture of African American head coaches in the National Football League, and you could even say like in college and just in general. Obviously, when he took over for the Pittsburgh Steelers back in 2007. The Rooney Rule, got him helped him get into the situation for sure. Um, and he's made the best of it, man. And I think like we definitely got to acknowledge that. Like we definitely gotta appreciate that and recognize that one way or another, whether you're a fan, not a fan, whatever the case may be. I think that's definitely like a really dope thing. And you kind of go back and you look at some other coaches that were head coaches during the time frame. I think obviously we give credit to Tony Dungy for sure for being one of the first guys to kind of knock down some of those walls, and also too giving Mike Tomlin his opportunity in Tampa Bay as well. But just some coaches that were coaching during the Tomlin era, I think like we just need to show some love for as far as like Tomlin helping orchestrate a premier franchise and being given the opportunity and obviously being really successful inside the first two years of his tenure with the Steelers. So some of the coaches, right, are Tony Dungy, Lovie Smith, Jim Caldwell, Romeo Crennel, Leslie Frazier, Todd Bowles, who still is currently a head coach, Hugh Jackson, Vance Joseph, Steve Wilkes, Brian Flores, and Raheem Morris. So definitely shout out to Coach T for knocking down some of those barriers, right? And helping in that space, man. I think it was a beautiful thing to see him be able to do what he did in Pittsburgh for the amount of time that he did it, and kind of highlighting the fact that no matter what the circumstances are, guys can go out and do this thing and can be successful. So definitely, want to tip my cap to Mike Tomlin for sure, and just the impact he had on the culture overall, as far as African American head coaches in the NFL and even in college as well. So next thing, man, just to talk about uh, Tomlin in his time, like as the Steelers head coach. And I know obviously a lot of scrutiny over the 19 years and the one Super Bowl and the losses in the playoffs and things. But I think you really we all really need to kind of put it in perspective, whether you're a fan or whether you're unbiased or not. Just really like the era that Mike Tomlin played in, or excuse me, coached in during this time, right? Obviously, he had his two Super Bowl appearances, won one of them. We all know that. But just being in an era where, you got guys like Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, um, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. And I think like obviously like Andy Reid and Bill Belichick are obviously like the standards when you look at, or two of the guys that you could argue are the standard for head coaches, just all time. And then you get down to guys like Sean Payton, right? Like Sean Payton is considered like a extremely talented, extremely smart, really good head coach, really solid. One Super Bowl with Drew Brees, and that's obviously in 2009. And you got Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers, which I think we know. Like we can all kind of give Aaron Rodgers a little more credit on that one than Mike McCarthy. Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. That was a time, man, like where the Legion of Boom was like off the hook for sure. And just most recently, right, Sean McVay, Matt Stafford, 2021, Eli Manning and Tom Coughlin, like those were definitely really unique situations for sure. The one that is probably the oddest one on the list is Nick Foles and Doug Peterson, and then Gary Kubiak and Peyton Manning as really, the Denver Broncos defense really kind of led the way, if you will, for a guy like Peyton Manning, like in that space, and even with somebody like Gary Kubiak, right, who isn't necessarily and hasn't always been somebody or isn't somebody that like you look at and I was like, okay, um, like this is the guy, right? Um, so yeah, no, definitely, man. End of an era for sure. It definitely is. It is kind of sad, yeah, Nick. It is, man, for sure. I just think, like, we have to take all this into perspective, right? Like, you know, playing in an era and playing in a situation with with Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes, um, sometimes you're gonna come out on the other end of things, right? Like it's not gonna pan out for you. It's not an excuse, it's just the reality of the situation. Like there's a lot of other teams and head coaches that didn't even sniff this. Um, so I think that's like important. It's important to call out, you know what I mean? Like I obviously diehard Steeler fan. Like I've been frustrated for sure, like in different spaces at different times, but um, you know, it is what it is, Then let's take a look at like the defensive coordinators too. I want to talk about those guys. Actually, not as much turnover as you would think, as far as like defensive coordinators go during the time with Mike Tomlin. Um, really the Dick LeBeau 2007 through 2014. I think obviously LeBeau got a little bit longer in the tooth, like as things kind of progressed. But at his peak, like we know, like this defense was hell at its peak, and they're replacing some of the pieces that they had to replace due to retirement, et cetera, et cetera. You got guys like obviously Troy Polamalu, James Harrison, right? Like guys like Lamar Woodley during this time, Aaron Smith, Casey Hampton, guys that, going back, right? Like, it was time for a change, right? The league changed. And I think you hear players talk about it. If you've seen any interviews with Tomlin, like you've talked about it, the certain defenses, that defense was one that, um, kind of changed how things went. Ryan Clark, a part of that group as well. Um, so you kind of had to adopt to the way the game was being played, and they attempted to do that. They definitely had some misses in the draft, and I said this last year, kind of to recap like the season for them is like I think like that's where like a lot of this comes down to is just like misses in the draft. And like is Mike Tomlin responsible for every single mishap that happened for the Pittsburgh Steelers? Absolutely not. Is he responsible for the things that happened on the field? Yeah, for sure. And the things that happened in that locker room, like 1,000%. But yeah, like when you look at the defensive coordinators and then Keith Butler, he took over after Dick LeBeau, and then currently, obviously, Tyrell Austin, which, Tyrell Austin left a lot to be desired, in my opinion, like as far as like from a defensive coordinator standpoint. But I think like one of the things like about Mike Tomlin, loyal to a fault, man. He's bringing his people with him, and I think like that's the thing for him is leader, and sometimes to a detriment of yourself. And I think that's kind of how that's how that ended. For me, I think there was definitely a lot of opportunities. Nick says Brian Flores time, like yeah, Brian Flores was there, but obviously Tomlin didn't cut the cord with Tyrell Austin for it to be Brian Flores' opportunity, right? And there's always going to be critics, right? Because even I remember even like with the Dick LeBeau era, right? Like the zone blitz, the Patriots at that time they were spreading people out, and Pittsburgh didn't have enough depth on the corners to be able to play against those guys, and then they kind of transitioned into having more secondary options, and as they transitioned into more secondary options, like we became more vulnerable against the run, we became more vulnerable as far as pass rushers. So that kind of is what it is, like in that space as well. And I think one of excuse me, one of the other things as well for me, right, is like you think about some of the really good times, like offensively, like with this group, because I think like that's really what Mike Tomlin is going to be remembered and known for, is the offensive era, the offense of this team, while he was the head coach with Ben Roethlisberger, and that's really what it is, man. Like there was a time where like the Pittsburgh Steelers were one of the most entertaining, fun teams to watch, in football. And Ben Roethlisberger was a huge part of that, right? And I think like that's also another element of this for me is like there aren't franchises who lose Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And like, am I going to sit here and tell you that Mike Tomlin is the greatest coach ever in the National Football League? No. Is he a Hall of Fame coach? Yes. I don't care what anybody says. He's a Hall of Fame coach. You can't convince me, of anything other. Um, and Ben Roethlisberger, obviously, like he'll get in the Hall of Fame as well. But like, people have to understand, man, like if you don't have a franchise quarterback, man, in the NFL, you have to have a all world defense. And they took a couple of different approaches, like with this team. And obviously it didn't work, man. Like it didn't work to get to a Super Bowl. And yeah, like, being, always having a winning season, like you gotta be competitive to get there, man. For sure. But I think like Mike Tomlin for me, I think he'll always be remembered like in that offensive era with the killer bees with Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, and obviously Big Ben Roethlisberger and Martavis Bryant. I think like that's what he'll be remembered for. Is like that right there. The Super Bowl, I think, like obviously, like people feel a certain kind of way about that. Some people do. Some people try to say that, that's Bill Cowher's team that he won the Super Bowl with. Like, no, because even if we want to go down that space, like Bill Cowher only has one Super Bowl with the Steelers. And like the Steelers, I'm old enough to remember, but young enough to know that like those teams were infamous for getting to the AFC Championship, or being a very high seed and getting bounced in the playoffs, in that space. So I don't think it's a lot of difference in between, like a guy like Bill Cowher and a guy like Mike Tomlin, and like we praise Bill Cowher as we should, because I think Bill Cowher was a great coach, a Hall of Fame coach, like as he is, and I think Mike Tomlin is in that same space. So I don't think it should be discredited for the things that happened for him as far as losses in the playoffs, or lack of success in the playoffs, or whatever the case may be. But another thing I think Mike Tomlin will also be really remembered for, as well, as being like, just like I talked about, like how he managed personnel. I think Mike Tomlin is the greatest manager of when I say personnel, I'm meaning people, like not like the X's and O's and stuff, but for him to be able to harness some of the players that he had in his locker room, to be able to harness them and keep them on track. I don't think there's been a coach in the NFL that's done a better job at that space. And I don't want to say head cases, but I would say egos and attitudes, or perceived egos and attitudes, right? I'm not in the locker room or anything, but like perceived egos and attitudes for outside perception. I don't think there was a guy in the NFL that did a better job than Mike Tomlin, or has done a better job than Mike Tomlin with that. I think you even think about a guy like Bill Belichick, like he was just no nonsense. So like either it worked or it didn't. Like there was no in between. You were going to do it his way or you were gone. But I think like for Mike Tomlin to be able to, in a locker room, to be able to have an Antonio Brown, a Le'Veon Bell, a Ben Roethlisberger, a James Harrison, a Ike Taylor, all really good teammates, man. From what everybody I say, good teammates, Antonio Brown, but like overall, right? Like good teammates, but just like big personalities, big attitudes, like big names. Even like this year, bringing in a guy like Jalen Ramsey, George Pickens, right? Like Aaron Rodgers, like all the guys that like a lot of players or a lot of teams or organizations had reservations about, or just had like nobody, I don't think was better than that right there. And I think like when you hear the sentiment from players, and just like the everything from yesterday, as far as like Mike Tomlin stepping down and like the impact that like it had on players, and even previous players, like guys like Ryan Clark, like, hey man, like they got a job to do and they're calling it the way that they see it, right? Whether it's change, for the Steelers or whatever, doesn't matter, man. Like, they're doing their job, and I don't think there's been a better head coach than Mike Tomlin, like navigating that space, for sure. And like, all this talk about like, the misses and stuff, like there were some things that happened and some players that he drafted that like things went really well. Like you just get to name a couple of players that like were drafted during the regime while he was there. TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, Marcus Pouncey, David DeCastro, Juju Smith-Schuster, Bud Dupree, Steven Tuitt was a guy that, man, like if he could have stayed healthy, goodness gracious. Mike Wallace, man. Mike Wallace was another guy that like during that Killer Bees era, during that time frame, drafted, I think in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. That was another guy. Najee Harris, like it was never sexy, right? But obviously he had his contributions. George Pickens, we just talked about him. Joey Porter Jr., who's really started to come on for the Steelers. So like it's not all misses. Pat Fryermuth, like it wasn't all bad, man. And I think just a lot of like people, and they have like really bad short-term memory. Like I know it's like, what have you done for me lately type of deal. I get it. But like, man, like there were definitely some players there that have contributed and have been solid players, in the league. And then, you talk about like the other side of the coin, like what I look at as well is, there's not a lot of players as well that have left the Pittsburgh Steelers and have been and have found success with their current franchise or the franchise after that, right? There's some players that have definitely that like stick out to me that have definitely done well. I think Kevin Dotson, obviously, offensive lineman for the Rams, is somebody that kind of strikes me as somebody that's done well since he's left. Another guy that strikes me as well is Emmanuel Sanders. I think that was a Big Ben situation, but yeah, man, like I just think the short term memory, man. That's one thing, and then I'll hit on the playoff piece as well. Just kind of going back and revisiting some of these losses and their last win, right? Last win was against Kansas City with Alex Smith in 2017. And then they lost in the AFC Championship to the New England Patriots, the Chris Hogan game. Love that for me. Love that for all Steeler fans. Not really. And then I'm gonna go down through some of the losses and some of the scenarios. Not excuses. These are just all facts, right? Jacksonville Jaguars in 2018 with that all-world defense that did feature Jalen Ramsey on that defense. 42-45. Jacksonville Jaguars were a botched play away in Foxborough away from going to the Super Bowl. Again, it doesn't matter. Like they lost. That is what it is. Now, this is one that like I have a hard time swallowing. In 2021 against the Cleveland Browns, that is one that like, yes, that's a bad loss right there, 37-48. But I think, kind of revisiting history and seeing Baker Mayfield didn't make the playoffs this year, but I think revisiting that game and seeing like, what Cleveland was, yeah, it's a bad loss. And then 2022 with Ben Roethlisberger, literally on his last legs they lost against the Kansas City Chiefs, who end up winning the Super Bowl. The year after that, Mason Rudolph brings the Pittsburgh Steelers to the playoffs against the Buffalo Bills in a 17-31 loss. That was a 7-point game going into the fourth quarter, I believe, before either a Deontay Johnson fumble inside the red zone or a George Pickens fumble in the red zone. Buffalo scores and kind of opens the game up. Last year, the Russell Wilson experience. Jeez, man. Like, that just wasn't good. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields' experience. They lose to Buffalo last year. Baltimore, as Baltimore just completely runs all over them. And obviously the most recent loss to the Houston Texans, 30-6, as that was actually not a bad game until the fourth quarter where everything just kind of went sideways and awry, man. So I think like, yeah, and now, like, I'm going to take, like, the next couple of minutes just to say, like, the thing that blows my mind right now is I can understand Steeler fans being frustrated about, like, obviously the state of the team, the situation, whatever. But to really force, I don't want to say force, but to wish this man out of here, guys, we don't even have a plan B. We don't even have a plan B. We don't even have an idea of who we would want to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And fans just want Mike Tomlin gone. Just want him gone. Just to have him gone. Like, that's wild to me. That's wild to me. I think, like, there's definitely some things, like, he's had some opportunities in during his tenure. He used to suck at the challenge plays. He used to suck at timeout management, or time management and timeouts. He sucked at those spaces, randomly going for 2 points, making wild decisions. Like, again, like, but that's his demeanor, that's his personality, right? But like, just to be like, let's get this guy who's been here for 19 years, like, let's get him out, let's get him gone. I don't know. I don't understand it. I think, like, coordinator wise, I think like that's a place where it's really stung us. I don't think we haven't had good play callers. And even if you look at the roster that was out there this year, man, like, I think goes without saying, like, you get to a point where, like, you're dragging a 41, 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers to the playoffs, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Calvin Austin, DK Metcalf, which I used to be a DK fan, but good gracious of life, man, some stuff's got to change in that space. But like, I just I don't know if there's a guy, and I hope there is a guy. I hope whoever it is that comes in, man, I hope whoever it is, like, is able to get us to where we need to be at, back to Pittsburgh Steelers football, back to, competing in the playoffs at a high level. But like, the grass ain't always greener on the other side, man. It's not always greener on the other side. And I think, like, the worst thing that could happen for us as Steeler fans is, Mike Tomlin takes a year off, goes and gets a very desirable job, puts himself in a very desirable situation. Because I feel like if he does come back to coach football, like, he's a smart man, he's going to put himself in the best situation. And then, we're going to see this. And like, that's the other thing, man. Not every coach, but a lot of coaches that are heralded high and mighty, like, the first stop, man, it wasn't like this. Like, it wasn't like this. Like, Bill Belichick in Cleveland, Andy Reid in Philadelphia. Andy Reid got to the NFC Championship game, I can't remember how many times, before they were able to get over the hump and get to the because that was the Tampa Bay situation with Tony Dungy. So like, there's a lot of really good coaches, man, that just, like, whether it's, and some of these guys, like, they end up being older as well. That's the other thing. Like, we had a young Mike Tomlin. So I just, like, I think, like, we really, and obviously it's happened, right? But like, we have to be careful with what we wish for, man, because like, the next 2 or 3 years are gonna be a situation that, like, we haven't found ourselves in a long time. And teams that have had franchise quarterbacks, like the New England Patriots, like the Indianapolis Colts, right? Like, you don't find yourself getting back to that same space just at the snap of a finger. And I think that's another part of this that, like, we all have to realize is, like, after being, tore those ligaments in his elbow, that was it, man. Like, that was it. That was game, set, match, point for us as the Pittsburgh Steelers, for me. And yes, coaches are supposed to raise the level of play of everybody around them. Mike Tomlin has done that. He's done that. So, like, to ask even more, or to suggest that, like, there's stuff that's left out there, I don't think I just don't think that's real, man. I don't think that's real. So yeah, I just, obviously, like, with everything that happened, man, and kind of dabbling in this space, I just felt like, I had to get on here and kind of share my thoughts, like, about the Steelers, Mike Tomlin, and just show love, man, for him, man, because the last 19 years, they've been fun. It's been definitely dope to see, like, from a cultural side of things, to see someone who looks like me and resembles me as the head coach for one of the most prestige organizations in sports. How he never wavered about where he wanted to be. His heart was always in it. His intentions were always in it. And just the impact that, like, he's had for the culture, and just the impact, like, he's had in sports. And even for, I'll get my one fantasy plug in there. He was always fantasy friendly too, like with running backs. And he was obviously in a spot where he just let Ben go out and throw when he could, man. So all right, man. So I got to sign up out of here, man. I got to get ready to hit this 9 to 5 real quick. But hey, man, y'all know the drill. Y'all know the deal. It's me. It's your main man, Johnny Main. So, hey, be on the lookout for me and the homie Nick Wilcox on Friday. You know the drill. Whatever you doing, don't do it. Tune into the Fantasy Football Show. Out.